Good afternoon, Dr. Cross. I have a few quick questions for you. I want to talk to you about what Cave of Breezes did on April 30th and the day before. But starting first with what causes landslide, you mentioned that gravity is the primary cause of the landslide.
Right.
And on your direct testimony, you mentioned that landslides are caused by slope instability.
Yes.
And the best measure of slope instability is to go there in person, isn't that right?
The best measure of slope instability is to go there in person. I'm not sure if I understand the question because I was talking generally about what causes landslides, so I'm not sure what going there in person has to do with what generally causes landslides.
Well, Doctor, going back briefly, you mentioned that when trees are uprooted, that causes the soil to be uprooted as well.
It can, yes.
And you would mention that there is a distinction between trees that have fallen down and trees that are uprooted, isn't that right?
Well, I don't think I said that, but I would agree that there could be a number of reasons why a tree would fall down. But I was talking about that a fallen tree in the context of a landslide would be an indicator that the ground is moving because the soil will push up the tree out of the ground, basically.
But Doctor, just to clarify, the best method or the correct method is that it's uprooted trees, not fallen down trees. The uprooted trees, isn't that right?
Well, technically they're uprooted, but then they fall down after they're uprooted. So, I mean...
But Doctor, a tree that just falls down is not a tree that's uprooted, isn't that right?
Not necessarily, no.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned that as a TV show host, you talk about landslides with children a lot.
Yes. So the whole goal of my television program is to get kids excited about earth sciences because I love earth sciences so much.
Right. And so in one of your episodes, you talked about the differences between certain types of landslides.
Right.
And in this case, this was a landslide known as a debris avalanche.
Yes, it could be described as a debris avalanche.
And there's some unique characteristics of the debris avalanche.
Yes.
And one of those unique characteristics is the speed of these landslides.
They can be pretty fast, yes.
And another one of these characteristics is the amount of volume of this landslide.
Well, this particular landslide, yes, it did produce a lot of debris.
And the third one, if I remember from the show, is that these type of landslides are not as foreseeable as other types of landslides.
I think I mentioned in my program that they can happen very fast, and that's why these landslides can be extremely dangerous.
Right. And now, Doctor, in your direct testimony, you mentioned the three main causes of these landslides. And I want to talk to you about the history of this case. So, Doctor, you aware of the term probabilistic recurrence period, right, as a geologist?
Yes. When we're talking about landslides, yeah.
Okay, and this 50-year time period does not fall within the probabilistic recurrence time period for Cave of Breezes, isn't that right?
I don't think I made any specific statement about what the probabilistic recurrence period for Cave of the Breezes specifically is. But I was saying that since a slide did happen 50 years ago, that's not a lot of time at all, geologically speaking.
Now, Doctor, I want to talk to you about the other area that you addressed, the increased rainfall. You mentioned that this increased rainfall also determines the amount of slope instability.
It's a significant contributing factor.
And in your report, you mentioned no tipping point for slope instability.
Well, no, but when there's extremely abnormal precipitation, it's a lot more likely that the slope's going to be unstable.
You mentioned nowhere in your report is there any mention of when that increased likelihood becomes apparent. Is that right?
Well, I think it would become apparent when you would notice that it is raining and snowing a lot.
But you meant nowhere in your report is there a mention of at a particular point of increased rainfall leads to an increased risk of a landslide.
No, I didn't give a specific amount of rainfall, but when it is heavier than usual, that is a contributing factor.
You just talked about a general relationship. Would you agree with that determination, characterization?
I would agree that heavy precipitation is a very important factor in this case, and it is a large contributor to landslides generally happening.
But, Doctor, going back, you were able to review the landslide that happened 50 years ago. Isn't that right?
Yes, the last landslide was 50 years ago.
And in your review, were you able to come to any type of conclusion on what caused that landslide?
It was not clear what caused that landslide. I just know that a lot of people died as a result.
And you made no site visits to check the slope instability or even the anchors on Cave of Breezes, isn't that right?
Well, I wouldn't have been able to check the slope instability of it before the landslide. And then after, it would have been sort of a moot point. I wasn't able to visit the site itself because of the scheduling of my show, but I don't need to absolutely visit the site in order to form my opinion.
Okay, Doctor, now I want to talk to you about the best methods of predicting these landslides. In your report, you emphasize that an annual survey is what's required.
Yes, an annual survey, and then if any of the other factors or warning signs of a landslide are obvious to you, you should probably get another survey done, no matter whether it's been within a year or not.
But your report personally emphasized the requirement of an annual survey. That was the extent of your report.
That was the extent of my report, but that's not the extent of my opinion.
And so, in this case, Cave of Breezes did exactly that. They got that annual report.
It's unclear from the record whether a full year had elapsed or more between the last survey and this landslide. It could have possibly been more than a year. But you also notice from the record that Bobby Daly stopped doing these regular checks in 2016 and was opting to do it every 3 years. And I completely disagree with that decision of his.
But you don't know, but Bobby Daly still got the annual survey done, isn't that right?
In 2016, he did a survey.
And now, Doctor, I want to talk to you about the 2 recommendations you made on direct examination.
Okay.
You made the recommendation of Cave of Breezes being closed down, and you made the recommendation that Cave of Breezes should have had more food.
Food, period.
Yes. So, Doctor, I'm going to, Your Honor, permission to approach the witness, who's been copy of the deposition. Doctor, I'm handing you a selected portion of your deposition on the preparedness for Cave of Breezes in the event.
Your Honor, we just asked what portion opposing counsel is asking the witness to look at.
I'm sorry. Paragraph, page 43, portion B should be the first and second paragraphs of.
Thank you.
Dr. Cross, nowhere in that report do you mention the need for emergency supplies up to 37 days.
Give me 1 second. No, I don't mention anything here about extra supplies, but it does stand to reason that if they had more supplies in the cave, Bobby Daly wouldn't have been rushing around trying to get them out alive.
And nowhere in your direct testimony, in your training or experience, did you point to any professional standards in this industry to have emergency supplies for over 37 days.
There is no rule anywhere saying that you need exactly 37 days of supplies, but tour guides should be having extra supplies in their emergency packs when they take people on tours. But, you know, Cindy Cooney abandoned the tour group.
And you could point to just no rule that requires emergency, anything over 3 days. Isn't that right?
There is no there's no rule that there needs to be exactly 37 days of food.
Your Honor,
But-
permission to approach and retrieve the document. Thank you, Dr. Cross. Now, Dr. Cross, I want to talk to you about the actions of Max Petunia that day. You were able to review the deposition of Max Petunia.
Yes.
Correct? And you were able to review the waiver form.
Yep, I did look at the waiver form.
Okay. And you were able to review both depositions of Bobby Daly, Chase Quinn, and Max, who mentioned that Cindy did give an emergency warning that day, right?
She told the group to stay together in the event of emergency, and then she violated her own rule when she left the...
Sure, Doctor, I'm just asking you to clarify that Cindy did give that warning that day. Isn't that right?
From my review of the record, nobody's saying that she didn't give the warning, so it's a fair inference that she did, in fact, give it.
No further questions.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Doctor. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, I am Dr. Carrie Dornberg.
And Dr. Dornberg, what do you do for work?
I am a registered geotechnical engineer, and I own my own consulting business.
What is a geotechnical engineer?
So I have a background in geology, geophysics, hydrology. I've studied earth movement and landslides for several years. So a geotechnical engineer, that means I study the way the earth moves and how to prevent that when there are landslides.
And what do you do in your consulting work?
I'm mostly involved in a lot of construction projects, but from time to time, the U.S. Geological Service will ask for my expertise in various matters, including cave-ins and landslides.
And Doctor, going back briefly, I want to talk about how did you become a doctor?
So I earned my undergraduate degree in geology. I earned a master's degree in hydrology, which is the study of water, and geophysics, which is the study of the earth and the way it moves, the way the land moves. And then ultimately I earned a doctorate and published multiple theses on earth movement and landslides.
And briefly on what was the process like in getting your doctorate?
It was very rigorous. I had to do years of research, lots of collecting data, analyzing it, and then reporting the results of my research. I had to defend my thesis and my conclusions before a panel of professors. And then after I earned my thesis and my doctorate, I actually became a professor as well.
Now, Doctor, I want to talk to you about landslides. What are the causes of landslides?
Landslides have a variety of causes. They happen all over the world, so really no two landslides are the same. Sometimes the causes are natural, sometimes they're man-made. Usually it involves the movement of water, but landslides can occur under a variety of conditions.
And Doctor, briefly, going back, how did you get involved in today's case?
I was asked by the defendant, Cave of the Breezes Expeditions, to look into the events surrounding the landslide from April 30th, 2017, and render an opinion.
And how did you come to that opinion?
I reviewed the materials in this case, some of the court documents, the complaint, the answer, depositions from the plaintiff and some of the defendant's employees, as well as photographs and records from the landslide.
And Doctor, you mentioned briefly before that there are many causes to a landslide. What effect does water play in the cause of a landslide?
So water, whether it's man-made or natural, can affect the way that the earth moves. And basically when soil becomes unstable, either through erosion or through something man-made like drilling or construction, that water and soil accumulates and basically causes what we call a debris avalanche, meaning just there has been such an accumulation of debris in land, there's no place for the soil to go but downslope and cause a landslide.
So, Doctor, is water always a warning sign in a landslide?
No, for any landslide in general, there are no warning bells or an alarm bell, quote unquote, to indicate that a landslide is going to happen.
And Doctor, what about fallen trees?
Fallen trees aren't necessarily an indicator that a landslide is going to happen.
Now, Doctor, I want to talk to you about this landslide in particular. What, if anything, made this landslide different from other ones you've reviewed?
Well, this landslide was very abnormal for several reasons. Just based on my review of the record, it appeared to move with a very high rate of speed and covered a very large amount of area. I believe in the record it says that the amount of debris covered 10 square miles. So just the sheer size and magnitude of this landslide made it very unusual.
And Doctor, you mentioned something before about a debris avalanche. Could you further explain that?
So a debris avalanche is a type of landslide and was the type of landslide that occurred at Cave of the Breezes. Debris avalanche is basically just an accumulation of rock and soil, a large amount of it, and gravity acting on that accumulation of soil, dirt, debris, or mud in this case, turns it into an avalanche.
And Doctor, are there methods to foresee a debris avalanche?
Not within the practice and the study of landslides and earth movement, there's not one particular method for studying and predicting indicators of these landslides.
And in this case, were there any professional warnings given about the risk of a landslide at Cave of Breezes?
No, it's my understanding that the U.S. Geological Survey does have an experimental warning system in place, but that no warning was issued for Cave of the Breezes or any of the surrounding area, either on that day or the time leading up to that landslide. So no warning was issued.
And Doctor, in your report, you mentioned something called a probabilistic recurrence period. What is that?
So a probabilistic recurrence period is basically just a fancy word or a fancy phrase meaning a given time period surrounding a particular piece of land. So in this case, for Cave of the Breezes, a probabilistic recurrence period is whether or not there has been landslide activity in the same spot before and whether that prior activity can give any indication of a future landslide.
And in this case, was there prior activity that would have given Cave of the Breezes enough notice?
Based on my review of the record and my professional opinion, No, there was some indication that there had been a landslide in this spot 50 years ago, but in my opinion, that's just so far removed from the events on April 30th that there's no way anyone would have been able to use that past landslide as an indicator that one would happen again, particularly one of this magnitude.
Now, Doctor, I want to talk about the actions that Cave of Breezes took that day. In your review of the record, what type of warnings did Cave of Breezes give that day?
So, Cave of the Breezes, in my review of the record, had excellent safety care and training its staff and taking care of its customers. My review of the record shows that there's a standard warning that's given to all tour groups, and that Cindy Cooney, in fact, gave that warning to Max's group that day, and that warning is to stay together in case of an emergency, stick together, don't move, stay in one spot.
And Doctor, how do you know that that warning is sufficient?
Well, I'm actually the president of the Rochester Spelunkers Club. In addition to all my professional work, I go on cave exploring groups about every other weekend. So I've seen a lot of cave safety trainings. But in this particular case, I know that this instruction worked and was adequate because Max and his teammates and his coach listened. When an emergency happened, they stayed together. The instructions were short and memorable, so clearly they worked.
And Doctor, what about a lack of a safety pack?
So Cindy did forget her safety pack, but in my opinion, because she immediately recognized that and went to go get it, that she did what she was supposed to do.
Doctor, what about a lack of an alternative exit?
Do you mean to the cave?
To the cave.
What would you say to an objection to relevance to that question?
Your Honor, assuming we're outside the presence of the jury, this witness will testify that an alternative exit wouldn't have made a difference in this case. It's relevant to show that Cave of Breezes could have possibly done something more.
Has it been alleged in this trial that an alternative exit was necessary?
No, Your Honor, it hasn't.
So why is it relevant?
In this case, just to show that Cave of Breezes did everything reasonably possible.
All right. I don't see how it's relevant in this trial.
Okay.
Something that the plaintiff hasn't even alleged being a problem.
I'll withdraw the question. Doctor, as in your review of your record, were you able to come to an opinion in this case?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to come to that opinion through your training, knowledge, and experience, through a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
And what was that opinion?
My opinion is twofold. The first part of my opinion, based on the review of the record in this matter, is that Cave of the Breezes had adequate safety procedures and that clearly they worked on the day in question, saved lives that day, including Max's. And the second part is that there was no way anyone, let alone experts or let alone Cave of the Breezes, could have predicted the landslide that day.
No further questions.
All right. Cross. All right.
The what?
The clerk's copy of the procedures.
Thank you. There's a distinction between anchors and buoys. Anchors is what keeps a ship safe in rough waters, where a buoy just allows somebody, just bobs up and down but provides no protection. But there are some waves that are too strong for anchors. And that's exactly the situation that Cave of Breeze found itself in the day of April 30th. This was a landslide that all parties have agreed to. Would have taken 37 days to remove the individuals trapped inside the cave. This was a landslide that you heard the experts talk about was over 100 kilometers per hour. This was a landslide that had over 10 kilometers per 10 square kilometers of dirt displaced. My partner my co-counsel asked you to remember two things during this trial. The first was that Cave of Breezes took actions that day that saved lives. And the second was that Max Petunia assumed the risk. Turning first to point one, if we can break down to the preventative measures that Cave of Breezes took before April 30th and the actions that they took on the day of April 30th until Max was rescued. Turning first to the preventative measures that Cave of Breezes took that day. There's been a considerable amount of testimony about whether or not this landslide was foreseeable and how Cave of Breezes could have known. There's been a disingenuous attack on Bobby Daly that he did not take the reasonable steps. But Bobby Daly, in each decision that he made, consulted with the person who was best informed in that area. In the area of whether or not a cave-in was foreseeable, he consulted with his insurance company, who told him that an annual survey was what was required, and that even you could make it tri-annually. And Bobby Daly listened to that advice. Bobby Daly got the survey done, and the survey was boilerplate. It did not show increased risks of cave-ins. And turning to our experts you heard today, you heard from Dr. Carrie Dornberg that landslides have a variety of risk factors, that there isn't just one risk factor alone that causes a landslide. Water is not a sufficient alarm bell. Fallen trees aren't a sufficient alarm bell. Those are about landslides generally, that they cannot always generally be predicted. But this was a debris avalanche, and those are extremely unique because they are not predictable, even given those two risk factors. Even if we assume that those two risk factors were present in this case and were sufficient to put on notice, it was not sufficient for this type of landslide. This is a debris avalanche. As Dr. Dornberg emphasized, a unique avalanche. Now, you heard from Dr. Chris Cross, who mentioned that how a slope stops from becoming a landslide are anchors in the ground. But Dr. Cross could only point to evidence of downed trees. Dr. Cross had never visited the site. Dr. Cross mentioned that the U.S. Geological Service did not put out a landslide warning that day. And be aware that there is this distinction between anchors and buoys on a slope. Downed, uprooted trees are like buoys, but downed trees that retain their anchors, or downed trees that have not been uprooted, are still anchors on that slope. And finally, turning to the actions that Cave of Breezes took that day. You heard testimony from Bobby Daly that he acted swiftly. He saw that those hockey team was trapped in the cave, and he immediately called 911 and knew that he had to act swiftly because of how large this landslide was. And it was because of Bobby Daly's actions that we're able to save the hockey team. You heard testimony that Cindy Cooney and Bobby Daly didn't do enough that day, that they could have done something more, but there was no testimony what that alternative was. What there was testimony from Dr. Dornberg was that instructions to stay together was able to save lives that day. The instructions to stick together was what allowed the hockey team to all get together, to all get out together. And now turning to Max Petunia, knowing the risk that day. You heard from Max himself that he saw the waiver form. And you're going to get a chance to review this waiver form in person, and you will see all of the risks highlighted in cave exploration. And Max, after reviewing this, went to Cave of the Breezes and received a safety instruction that also spoke about the risks of a cave-in and what to do in the event of emergency. And Max stayed. And Max knew that there was a landslide in Cave of Breezes before. And Max knew that it was raining that day. But Max entered the cave. Max knew these risks. And because Max knew these risks, and because Cave of Breezes did everything reasonably possible that day, we ask that you find Cave of Breezes not liable.
Okay, rebuttal?